and hand things over to Kelly. Kelly, thanks for being with us today, and thanks again to everybody for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate everyone in attendance taking the time to join us in exploring the practices of managerial leadership and how they can align your people and your purpose. Again, my name is Kelly. I'm the lead analyst and founder at Align Management Partners. So I did get a little bit of a few responses in kind of a scope of people within their organizations and their businesses and where they're at. So there's a little bit of variety there. So we're going to see different phases of people in their management teams as we go. So hopefully I can provide some level of insight for each of those along the way. I want to start with a quote, and I promise I won't be reading from the screen or my slides other than this. I know that can be a presentation no-no, but so the most far-reaching, dramatic, and rapid changes in the behavior of individuals in an organization can be achieved by. This is the beginning of a passage from the book, The Requisite Organization by Elliot Jacques. Elliot was a behavioral psychoanalyst, social scientist, and management consultant. Several of the concepts we're going to talk about today we'll be covering through Elliot's work. So I would ask, if you want to throw in the chat, what do you think Elliot concluded was the most far-reaching, dramatic, and rapid changes to individual behavior in an organization? What do you think he was getting at by that phrase? I'm seeing purpose and mission. Anybody else have any thoughts on what Elliot was getting at of how we can dramatically change the behavior of people? Type of leadership, productivity and passion, ownership. That's related to what I'm getting at. So Elliot's feeling was the way that we change behaviors of individuals in an organization really can be achieved by changes in the organization, both in structure and in managerial leadership practices. I first read this passage 12 years after I had started my first business. It was an IT company doing computer support where we had very limited revenue. Our clients were moderately satisfied, and our service team was starting to be filled with dysfunction and drama. I continually found myself putting out fires in the day-to-day. As a lot of business startups, I think they can feel that pain. They're typically going through that with it. So the person that introduced me to Elliot's work in his book had started his business right at the same time I did. It was in the early 90s, and he had grown his revenues within a period of 5 to 6 years, 3 times that of what mine was. He also spent most of his days in sales and strategy. And through Elliot's philosophies and methodologies, he successfully implemented an aligned management team, which was something that I had not even thought about. And I was experiencing more doubt and drama while he was experiencing enjoyment in his business. As I immersed myself in Elliot's work, I started to realize that I was really misunderstanding the value of effective management and leadership in business. I started to realize this about other business owners that I found were feeling the same sort of confusion and doubt in their business. This new perspective profoundly changed the way I thought about engaging with people and eventually led to my focus on what are now our 6 practices of managerial leadership. So I will be pausing between slides just to see if anybody has any questions throughout any of the slides that we're going through. So if you do have some thoughts or questions, please pop those in there. A developing business will go through 3 phases as it evolves. The first phase is proof of concept. Proof of concept is the startup phase. It's the time to affirm your markets, fine-tune production and service delivery, and clarify the business's value proposition. You've successfully broke through proof of concept when you and your team have successfully repeated delivering on your promise. You've consistently converted prospects to clients, and the business is, I would, at least breaking even financially. You're becoming a little bit more sound. It shows the concept of your business is working in all facets, from delivery, demand, and internal operations. Proof of concept is a really exciting and fulfilling time. It was for me. There's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of optimism. I follow Tom Foster, who's one of the primary students of Elliott. He continues to have a management blog that I follow, and Tom refers to this phase as the go-go phase. Business growth after proof of concept often results in an environment and culture of confusion, doubt, and drama. At the root of confusion, doubt, and drama are promises made without really understanding the requirements of work, both in expertise and time. Complexity from growth often outpaces the necessary processes that need to be updated as the organization grows. Because the business owner continues to get pulled into the day-to-day of work and service, they fail at focusing any energy on strategic growth. Often they refer back to lip service instead of really having sound, requisite managerial leadership. This confusion, doubt, and drama eventually leads to dissatisfied clients that end up finding someone else to do their work and ultimately causing the business to fail. The enemy of great is good, and I experienced this for myself. There's another fate that can be experienced with confusion, doubt, and drama that's landing somewhere between success and failure. I kind of refer to it as the stale business. Being stuck at that ceiling. This was the fate of my IT company. The business just didn't evolve. It didn't fail, but it didn't evolve. We were stuck in working really hard for just kind of good enough. It was a very slow death. It was 17 years. Through our hard work and perseverance, I was able to prolong the lack of success of our business for 10 years before I finally decided to give it up. So how do we scale instead of fail? Smooth scaling requires leverage. And I believe there's two types of leverage. There's people leverage, and then there's automation leverage. Enjoying leverage has a cost. The cost of that leverage is an investment into our trusted teams. I took what I had learned through the end of my business ownership and into the next several years around Elliott's concepts and methodologies, and started working with another small tech company. I connected with another small business, small and growing business, and applied these managerial leadership practices I had learned. Over the next 10 years, they grew on average 20% a year, and they're still growing and going strong. I'm still very involved with them. Their founder recently purchased a cabin in northern Minnesota. It was always his dream, and has scaled his time in the business back. And he's 42 years old, and he's enjoying kind of that lifestyle company. And he'll be the first person to say that the organization's success was directly a result of his aligned, trusted management team that's executing on these managerial leadership practices. Today, we're going to explore those practices. And I believe, I'm a little biased, these practices can be applied if you're a solopreneur, if you have some contractors that you're dealing with, or you're bringing on your first employees, all the way up to 10 to thousands of employees. A lot of these concepts really had come out of the corporate world. Elliott's work was, based on larger corporations, governments, municipalities. But I believe that because it's rooted in psychology and people's behavior, it can apply in any size organization. For me, there are two sides to effective managerial leadership. Both are necessary for successful engagement of the members of our teams. both support improved communications and engagement of our teams. The first side is the interpersonal side. It is not my strong suit. I often, refer to it as the soft skills, or it's the touchy-feely stuff. I've even heard it referred to as kind of that squishy side of management. But the interpersonal deals with human behavior aspects of the employee engagement. These are interpersonal skills include things like emotional EQ, active listening, communicating expectations, and conflict resolution. I think these challenges are incredible from the standpoint of each person you hire has a unique psychology and emotion, and they don't come with a set of instructions. So your engagement needs to be individualized, and that's probably part of the reason I'm a very planned person. So I'm more on the tactical side than I am on the interpersonal side. Uh, the good news is there's an entire coaching community out there dedicated to developing these interpersonal skills in both leaders and managers. I'd also be curious, if you can signify in the chat, are there any coaches that deal with this interpersonal side in our attendance today? The longer I work in management, the more I respect the coaching community. That creates an awareness and trains the skills into our managers and leaders about the human side of management. This wasn't always the case. As I came through as a business owner with my big ego, I thought, again, that stuff was more fluff. I thought if you were good at the tactical elements, you can eliminate and get rid of the need for any of that interpersonal stuff. I felt that just by, having structure, having good assignments, having things documented, you can do away with that. And I quickly found and have developed, again, a complete respect for the coaching community. As a matter of fact, I often create alliances with them where I will come in on the tactical side, and they will come in and help deal with managers on the situational aspects. But I have brought it down to, I believe, three primary interpersonal skills that a manager should be aware of and have some skill in. There's more to it. This is my simplified version of it. I always try to get things down to three major points. But the first one, I think, is being able to assign work and communicate work in a way that inspires, in a way that's not a demand, but in a way that makes people feel that work is important. The second one is addressing shortfalls in performance with support instead of acting with authority. The third one to me is addressing conflict between team members, sort of being that referee when people aren't in agreement on a particular team. So that's as far as I go. Again, I understand the importance. I see how it connects in. And that's why I feel there's a good partnership that I have in the tactical side versus the interpersonal side with it. All right. So on the tactical side, the second side of managerial leadership is the tactical skills that maintains the framework of the organization and provides clarity and context for the work people engage in. So I believe the interpersonal and the tactical side are both very important. I just typically would say start with the tactical side of things. The tactical, skills or the tactical practices are structure, how we break down work, and we're going to get into that quite a bit here in a minute. Process development, how we determine what processes we need for the outcomes that we need. And then, improving them, of course. And then staff planning, training programs, of course, data analytics, how we create metrics to measure performance, and then a method for this, the continual improvement that we need to have. I think the tactical side of managerial leadership provides that basis for those interpersonal skills to happen. I think they help conversations if we start with clear assignments and clear understanding of our responsibilities. I believe small business owners need to first understand the work themselves before they can assign that and for other people to focus on them. So the focus of our discussion today is more on that tactical side. And again, that's where my strengths and my area of expertise is more at. So our topic today is really about aligning people and purpose. So how do we combine these interpersonal and tactical, skills of managerial leadership to align people in our purpose? I mean, how do we develop those trusted teams? Oop, shoot. Do we have any Simon Sinek fans here today? He's been a big influencer of mine, and I like to incorporate some of his thoughts and concepts. But Simon Sinek says, "Start with why." He has a great insight on purpose, or what he calls his why. It's necessary for long-term success to clarify the story of your purpose for yourself in your head. To be very clear about why are you doing this business? Because when things get hard, you're going to need that affirmation. And it also is going to be very helpful in bringing the people along into your organization. A business's purpose is a desired impact we wish to have towards a belief. Its mission describes the actions our teams and we will execute towards that desired impact. So mission is the we will, and the purpose is the so that. I'm not a huge into the whole idea about mission statements and vision and so forth, but I do believe that it's something that every small business owner should make sure they're clear on as they're interacting with the people in their organization. The people in our businesses are those who have chosen to join us in using their talents to contribute to our business's purpose. Ideally, they share the business's purpose and core values. Otherwise, they're just showing up for a paycheck. The people in our organizations become our greatest asset only when their contributions align with the organization's purpose. So let's connect the dots and align the people in our organization with our purpose. If Simon Sinek says start with why, I say follow with what and how. So what are they executing? We can't recruit and develop expertise without knowing what we need expertise in. This is why we need to understand requirements. What are the parts of the whole? I rarely use the term goals when presenting managerial leadership practices. Instead, I prefer the word requirements. Goals are often sort of arbitrary and emotional, and they're aspirational. Requirements are logical and calculated. To determine our requirements, we need to ask, what are the specific outputs from the work that will satisfy our purpose? And this is where structure comes in. Structure comes in, and structure is how we account for and organize all the requirements of work that gets aggregated to our purpose. It clarifies the parts of the whole. This is how the work in our departments combines to satisfy our mission in our business. Our vision describes what the organization looks like when it's fully executing its purpose. Every vision needs a purpose. The task inventory then is how we define and account for our required work. It's the connecting point between the people and the purpose, and is the first of the 6 managerial leadership practices. Tasks organized into the structure provide a framework of all the required work for the organization to maintain its vision. We'll see in a bit how the task inventory becomes the basis for the other practices of managerial leadership. The task inventory organized into a requisite structure provides context and meaning to the work we do in our businesses. I recently became a follower of the idea of first principle thinking. This approach to growth is to elevate the fundamental parts through the structure that we created to elevate the whole of the organization. Success comes when we have high performers executing the right work to our performance. Aligned high performance is the capability and capacity to deliver the requirements that satisfy our purpose. High performers in our business are more fulfilled in their roles than low performers. So I think in the end of having our business be successful, it just so happens that that's what people within our organization want as well. So we need to do some sense of competency development to elevate performance. Competency development, for me, breaks down to 3 major components. The first one is knowledge. And this is how we are, providing an understanding of the why, what, and how, kind of referring to the people as subject matter experts. But we need to give them the understanding, the underlying methodologies and concepts of the work that they're going to be performed to give them context and purpose in it. The second aspect of competency developed is skill. And this is how we apply knowledge towards mastering and execution. We do that through training. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And then the final third of competency development is engagement. And this is back to that human behavior side. And it kind of speaks to people's state of mind. Personally, I look at it as, are they interested in doing the work that we have for them to do with that? So roles are created and assigned as an assignment of responsibility of the people engaged in satisfying the purpose, both at the front line and through the aggregation of that work to the organization's purpose. These assignments come directly from the task inventory that was created to account for the requisite work. So you can see how the task inventory becomes a critical connection point in the alignment of our people and our purpose. So this also represents to me that sort of division between what is leadership and what is management. I feel like there's been, a lot of discussion around, focus on leadership and not on management. That I really believe that, management has gotten a bad name over the past years, and to manage people is somehow not as good, or is being more of a leader versus more of a manager is preferred. And I believe that both are equally important. And I look at it from a standpoint of leadership is about, focusing on purpose and having bigger picture thinking through the organization, understanding its requirements and defining and enforcing the culture. Management is more focusing through that leadership into the direct execution and coordination of work. So they're focusing more on tasks and roles and performance elevation for our team members. So I look at management as the broccoli of business success. I try to be healthy, and I understand that broccoli is really going to help support my health, but I typically don't like to eat it. And I see management sort of as that same sort of way with managerial leadership. So I did want to put a few more thoughts around the people side of things, and how both, again, these are can apply to the tactical and the interpersonal side of things. But before I start, I want you to think about a time in your career, somewhere along the line, where you had a great manager, and think about that experience. What was it like to come to work? How did they interact with you? How was your day set? Were you more encouraged to come to work? Were you feeling good about the execution of the work that you were doing? On the flip side of it, think about having a job that you had with an absent or somebody who was more ego driven and authority driven in their management, and what that felt like. I talked to a lot of friends around the idea, and I love to hear stories of both good and bad managers in just sort of a surveying of what's out there. But at the end of the day, the number one reason people leave a job is their manager. I recently had a conversation with a young, inexperienced college student who took on an internship the summer after his freshman year. So it was a little bit early for him to do that, and decided to take it on. But when he got there, there was a complete lack of oversight by his manager, and really started to create a high level of doubt and overwhelm in his experience. He really dreaded it. He needed to finish it out. It actually went so far as he started to doubt his ability to do the work, to even continue his career in that vocation. I mean, just imagine a business filled with people with that attitude. Contrasting this experience with a supportive manager that's providing training and encouragement, and really understanding where that person is at in their day to day and their week to week as they go. So to engage, engagement is the measurement, I think, of interest in the people of the organization. Gallup studied 2.7 million workers across 10,000 teams to come up with their 12 needs for fulfillment at work. Let's take a second. So there's 12. Some of you, the coaching community out there, might be aware of this, but if we could in the chat, what do you think are some of the 12 needs of fulfillment at work? This was a survey of workers, employees, saying this is what I want at work, or this is what I would need for my fulfillment or in my engagement. So we're seeing acknowledgement, supportive manager, communication. These are part of kind of what we are coming up with. These are some good answers. Opportunities to grow and see the results of their work, autonomy, knowing their work benefits others and makes a difference. Clear goals and performance metrics is really going to start with my number one on here. Is there were 12. I did pick through those 12 of the ones that really, I think, came through on the tactical side of things. So I can include that link to that Gallup poll if people are interested. But the number one that I felt that relates to our managerial leadership practices, I know what is expected of me at work. So, so imagine showing up every day to work and doing the work you love to do. I think about that from a standpoint of your frontline people, your managements, especially the business owner, his or herself, to be able to just work on the things that you want to and not have to do all of the other aspects of it. Satisfying, so contributing to the team and satisfying the organization's purpose. This starts putting people in the right seats to do the work that they love to do. So I believe a manager of people should always start with providing clear expectations. And this is around the idea of be clear of the why, the what, and the how. I think that's where we typically come up short in providing, clear expectations or understanding of how that work should be completed. So number two on the list, and there were a few responses that did align with this one as well. At work, I have the opportunity to do the work I do best every day. Um, so oh, this starts putting people will do their best work if they're doing work that they love to do. And then the final one is, and this was alluded to, there's someone at work who encourages my development, and that's some common sense. But it's a great manager that tries to keep their finger on the pulse of that every team member on their team. Members of our team should spend their days in that sweet spot. I love the description of it, somewhere between bored and stressed out. And I think that's a great manager's skill or manager's awareness to really know for each person, are they not being challenged enough and they're bored, or are they constantly being and dealing with tasks, assignments where they don't have the level of expertise that they should have. At the end of the day, when it comes to engagement for me, I simply look at it as take them on a journey, know where they're at, know and understand their capabilities, their strengths and weaknesses, and then understand the expectations of the work that's being assigned to them through the task inventory, and have an understanding of where they're at with each of those for it. So I look at having a managerial leadership platform as a way of moving towards success. But I'd also be, I want to look at why businesses fail. So over 32 years of working in small business, I've concluded on boiling it down to three primary reasons why businesses fail. And so I'm wondering what you all would think would be, what are some of the common reasons that people, as they start out and get going in their business, why it would eventually fail? So I'm seeing some toxic environment, a lack of vision, not asking for help, no clear objectives or problem to solve, lack of direction, lack of a business plan, over leveraged, and poor finances. So a lot of those will funnel into my top three. But so number one on my list is, and I go back to the work. It's basically a lack of awareness of the requirements of the work. I talk to a lot of people who do have vision. Most of the business owners that I talk to do see their business as bigger than it is today. But I think they fail to understand the comprehensiveness of the work across the entire organization. Usually they have subject matter expertise in one area, typically fulfilling on whatever their product or service is, but they typically don't understand a lot of the aspects when it comes to things like finance and accounting, technology, or the ability to create demand for their products and services. So to me, it's that needing to really have your arms around and account for all of the work. My number two is ineffective people management. So it's back to that both interpersonal and not having in place practices that align their people to their purpose. So it can be a lack of leadership, but it's usually a lack of that directing people to do the work and their capabilities. We did a survey recently of 12 business owners, and 100% of them They are varying degrees of success. 100% of those 12 said, I don't like managing people. So it's typically not their strong suit. And then the last one to me is along the lines more about lack of strategy and poor decision making. There's a misinterpreting the market. They think there's more need than might be there. There's a lack of preparation for the next. They're focused so much on today that as they do have success, they're not prepared for it. And then the final aspect, someone did talk about over leveraged and inadequate financial modeling and forecasting. So they didn't take the time to really understand the financial needs of their business as it grows. So a managerial leadership practice platform becomes the antidote for these contributors to failure. The first one aspect of it is really understanding that work through the structure and how we account for all that required work. Providing clarity in the why, what, and how. And that's in developing trust in the people that deliver our promises. And then having confidence in our plan to grow, and that's the strategic aspect. So there's these three areas of managerial leadership that our platform will provide for us: structure, oversight, and strategy for it. So we're going to dive into the next section here around structure. So again, structure is really at the core of the tactical aspect of managerial leadership. So I'll ask of our attendees here in the chat, do you have an org chart? Do you currently have an org chart? I'm assuming no response means no, or a lot of people create them. I believe that the org chart and structure in small business it is often misunderstood. Oh, I didn't say I did get misunderstood there. I don't necessarily believe not having an org chart is bad, but we'll talk about what it can do for you. I think small business leaders often see it as a hindrance, and even they do try to avoid it. So I look at having an org chart as completely different. I see the org chart being more of a showing of your work structure. So I feel structure is liberating and proposes the philosophy around freedom within a framework. I'm just reading back through a few of the comments that came through. So I have one here that many don't want one or desire a flat structure. Sorry, I didn't hear you say it was bad. Rather, yeah. So, and this is really getting to where I think we need to rethink the org chart, and the difference between an org chart and what structure is for it. The tactical side of managerial leadership starts with structure, and structure is how we move from chaos to order. Chaos is, as I said before, is really at the root of confusion and doubt, and confusion and doubt can become a cancer to the business. Once a business owner's state of mind is dominated by confusion and doubt, the business will soon fail. So structure, on the other hand, creates order and brings clarity. It brings clarity that starts to build the foundation for confidence in our teams. Structure also provides a mechanism for agreement. Agreement is the first step in developing trust. Structure gets everyone on the same page with the why, what, and how of their responsibilities. So going towards structure also means kind of going towards a little bit more formality. And the answer is usually somewhere in the middle with especially when we're talking about small businesses. When you have clarity and agreement, you'll start to experience stability in your business. At the very least, we need to provide clear expectations. You don't have to give specifics about work always, but we want to have clear expectations. I love the Brene Brown recommendations of paint done. So a documented structure starts to paint the picture of the organization in what its ideal state would be. So I would ask you to rethink structure and realize it can be a driving force for your business. I recommend that you stop thinking of structure as a chart of who reports to who, and think more about structure really more as an accounting of work for it. So when we talk about flat organizations, that's more of a staffing sort of structure. When I talk about an org chart and structure, I'm talking about how we organize the outputs of work. Later, we'll see that you can layer onto it assignments of responsibility. But I think before we can really have the requisite structure for our organization, we need to base it first on the work. So understanding and managing the complexities of modern business operations can be incredibly overwhelming for most small businesses. I mentioned that earlier, that when you come into and start your business, you're typically have very limited subject matter expertise. Um, Again, it can be a lack of structure and accounting for all of that different work that can lead to chaos. So there's a need to departmentalize to account for and manage these complexities. This departmentalization of business functions becomes the sort of horizontal or across the business structure. Again, I recommend you stop thinking about organizational structure of groups of people and instead see it as groupings of work requirements. This includes the expected aggregation of output from processes, as well as the necessary skills of the people executing them. So departments are a collection of required work that we will break down into tasks, and not necessary. I don't look at them as collections of people. There are people that will be assigned to that work, but I start with understanding the work first and organize it on how it will aggregate. These complexities can be organized into 3 top-level requirements: delivery, demand, and internal operations. So delivery is how well you're able to create capacity for your product or service. Demand is how well you can create awareness, facilitate engagement, and convert new business. An internal operation creates the infrastructure of the organization. It includes functions that really integrate and balance our delivery and demand. It's the flow of finances through the organizations. It's the technology infrastructure. It manages our human resources as well. So Elliott's work also resulted in what he called the stratified systems theory. His theory included 7 layers in an organization. So again, he worked a lot with larger corporations, government, municipalities. And as I read through his work, it made a lot of sense to me, and I really resonated with it, enjoyed it, because he's again applying human behavior to these different layers. But I thought that's unnecessary for a small business. My world is basically small businesses that are 200,000 trying to reach their first million. And so if we thought about 7 layers, that would just be too much and too confusing. So I've adopted his theory down to basically about 3.5 for the application into that small business that's under $1 million. So the vertical axis, the up and down of a structure, is really the organization's hierarchy. This is where we start looking at people who are reporting to other people aspect. when we're departmentalizing, we're more looking across by subject matter and department for it. We start with the frontline work. Frontline work is the execution of work layer. This is where teams work together to produce the results needed for their department and the organizational success. Most founders start here. They're good at something and want to make a business out of it. I'm currently working with an owner of a kitchen cabinet design company who started his business because actually his dad had the business and he was a good kitchen cabinet designer and installer, and he wanted to make a business out of it. So the top layer then really becomes the strategy layer. The strategy layer answers the why and what of business. Why here and now, and what does it look like? Most founders I talk to imagine their business as something more than it is today. So they typically do have a vision. They may not have clarified it, but they started their business knowing that they wanted it to be more than it is today. They spend time and thoughts on what could it be. The primary role in the strategy layer is often referred to as the CEO, or a visionary has become very popular lately. It came from a book called Rocket Fuel, and who's also Gino Wickman's the author, and he was also the author of Traction, which I'm also do some traction. I'm not 100% into the traction camp, but I do like a lot of what they have to offer as well with it. So successful visionaries need to understand the market they're in and know their products and services and how they fit into it. Vision considerations are strategic and often outside facing, the CEO acting as the organization ambassador. When I first met the kitchen designer turned business owner, he definitely had a future vision of his business. He wanted to have it grow and be more than it was today. Management is the how layer. It's the coordination of execution of work that delivers on the promises to the stakeholders. The management team connects the frontline daily work to the long-term vision. The manager's role has several responsibilities that align with the 6 practices that we'll be going through in a minute. First, they need to be the subject matter expert. We shorten it and just call them a SME. So that expertise then gets applied into really developing and documenting the processes that they and their team will be executing. Next, they educate, train, and coach their team members. And then the final responsibility for them is really around analyzing and validating team and departmental performance. And then from that analysis, making corrections to the execution by the team or determining if a process needs to be improved and created. So I mentioned before that I have, these different layers down to really 3.5. So the half comes in within the management layer. There's really 2 parts to it. There's the managers who are directly overseeing the frontline work. And then there's the general manager who's really the manager of managers and acts as the hinge pin really between the vision and the management team. This role is also referred to as a COO. The traction people call it an integrator. I like that. I've also heard it referred to as the number 2. I don't particularly like that. I feel like often in a small business that has decided to bring on a general manager or COO, that role is just as important. So it's actually more difficult, I feel, in execution than what the visionary's role is. They're having to deal with both long-term thinking and frontline thinking. So the kitchen designer that I was working with, came to me because he wasn't clear on how to leverage what he knew about his work to operationalize or materialize his vision through the development of his management team. One of the objectives of Elliott's work was to understand the psychological differences between those that worked at the top of the hierarchy and then those that were at the front line in execution. He came up with an explanation that really included an understanding of individuals' abilities in managing the complexities of work as it combines or aggregates to the organization's purpose. So frontline workers consisted of repeating more simple tasks that are typically serial in nature. They're repeating that task fairly frequently, and it's very straightforward for it. I would typically use a sports analogy here that within a team, especially a football team, you're going to have people who just do one specific thing and get very good at it. The managers then are responsible for that first level of aggregation. So there's different tasks being assigned to different people on their team. The managers then have to understand how that work will come together to aggregate into the deliverables of the functions within their teams. And then the general manager working with the visionary have to see how all of the work across all of the departments and functions within those departments and the tasks being executed all aggregates up through the organization, fulfilling and satisfying the organization's overall purpose. Another aspect of Elliott's work was something that he called as the concept of time span in work. And this is kind of related to complexity, but where complexity is focused on space, time span is focused on time. So time span considerations are related to the complexity of planning. So how far into the future does someone in the business need to consider in their particular position? Frontline teams, again, they're repeating tasks, typically pretty straightforward. And there might be involved in project work that could be up to a month or around then. But again, typically in a small business, the frontline people are more dealing with what's happening in the day-to-day. The manager's time consideration is really more in that day-to-day, but up to a year. So they're looking at staffing plans, typically in hiring around capacity growth. How do we train people and get them up to speed as that's needed? There could be aspects of long-term purchasing. And then the general manager is a little bit further out. They're talking in terms of, what's happening within their business from 1 month all the way up to 2 years for it. And then the visionaries really thinking long term. So their focus needs to be about decision making that could be more into a year and up to 5 years as well. So basically, in looking at time span again to kind of simplify it, I look at it as the frontline teams are dealing with what's happening now. Your management team is really considering what's happening next within the organization. And then your visionary or CEO is really trying to focus their attention on what's going to happen in the later. The final aspect of Elliott's stratified theory is really along the lines of decision making and the complexities around that. Frontline work decisions typically are not very impactful or not very significant. They're usually dealing with the costs related to, servicing their clients, whether it's how they schedule their time, or should they be replacing parts on a computer, or so it's their decisions are typically fairly finite. Managers' decisions start to become a bit more significant as they affect entire departments. This typically includes scheduling across the team. Maybe it's in purchasing specific software solutions to facilitate, just departmental functions for it. The General managers' decisions are typically more organizational wide and have a broader impact over time. The most significant decisions of the general manager really the managers they hire. I mean, those are key expenses, but they have to get that right, or they can be wasted on them. Um, and also, more organization-wide solutions, more of a practice management solution that could affect and have its fingers into all the different departments. There's a lot of these different, like I said, practice management solutions that are part of billing, part of sales, part of service delivery. So that's where a general manager would oversee that implementation and be responsible for all the costs of it, from purchasing to implementation. Visionary decisions can make or break the entire organization. I mean, they're typically large investments into resources around entire lines of service, for example, or their facilities. A big decision to be made typically as a business grows is office space. I think that's become a little bit less in small business as we've gone to remote and hybrid, but there's still that consideration for it. At the end of the day, structure provides focus, focus on, subject matter expertise, and focus within scopes of time. So as a business owner, where's your focus? Is it on satisfying clients? Is it generating leads or making sure that there's enough cash to cover all the business expenses? Is it on today's issues? Is it on next week's client promises or next year's initiatives for growth? Being spread too thin can be the greatest source of stress for a business owner. It takes a lot of mental energy to meet all the requirements across the business through the hierarchy within the now, the next, and the later. So I love this graphic. I used to use the wearing many hats graphic, but I recently felt this is a little more accurate. This is more what it feels like, I believe, to be a small startup who's trying to evolve and grow with limited resources. So this is where, again, I think the work structure can be very helpful in strategically reassigning responsibilities to other people as your business evolves and grows. Each business will reassign differently as the business owner has different strengths and departments or within their hierarchy, where they focus their time, whether it's the now, next, or later. Of course, there's also budgetary considerations to be made, but I recommend first assigning to those types of activities that are really at the front line and mostly part of internal operations. These are things like bookkeeping, doing tech support, HR functions, data analytics, those types of things. There's a lot of general expertise that can be brought in quickly to reassign those responsibilities from something you might be doing to someone else. I like in these types of roles, contracting, you have less of a commitment, and they're bringing in a level of expertise that's typically already there. Keep in mind, though, as you bring them in, even as contractors, that it's your responsibility to make sure they're understanding your expectations. So in a way, you need to manage them, even though that they're not an employee. I see that in a lot of startups who are bringing on contractors, where they're not really providing clear expectations. They end up being disappointed in their performance where they really didn't set an expectation to start with. And then, treat them as a member of your team and oversee their work and analyze the work and make sure that it's done to your expectations for it. So the next aspect of this evolution could be then in developing your management team. So that development is sort of a natural next step after assigning frontline roles. This relieves you from the responsibilities of overseeing people at least in some of the departments of the organization. You're now at that point becoming the manager of managers, which asking the interpersonal side of things, those coaches, is a whole nother set of different skills and ways of interacting with people, different communications, to go from, overseeing frontline people to overseeing different managers. As your business evolves and grows, there's going to be a point to where you're going to want to pick a side, I think, in focusing over, being focused on the delivery of your service or being focused on creating demand for it. Usually in the internal operations side, that doesn't need as much attention, I think, but I've seen it in both sides with dealing with business owners as they're evolving and growing, that they have their natural strength in one side or the other of those two. I typically do see it more after that 500K and getting to 1 million, where the business owner wants to focus on creating the demand, being in marketing and selling and prospecting and doing those sorts of activities, and then finding a subject matter expert to come in who's going to overtake the delivery side of their business. So that would be interesting from a quick poll of the group. Where do you feel your strengths are? Is it more on the delivery side, the demand side, or maybe in the internal operations parts of things, whether it's accounting, HR, technology, facilities, that sort of thing? Be interesting to see where people land on that. My personal is delivery. My strength is more around delivery of service and the work involved in that, more so than I do on the demand side of things. So eventually, we're getting a few responses in there. I'm seeing some internal ops side of things. Eventually, you would want to consider hiring a general manager. And that role is basically around the integrating and balancing. And again, this typically happens later, unless, and I've seen this happen, where you would partner. You have a partnership where you complement each other very well, where one side is, or one person's more focused on delivery, they have that subject matter expertise, and the other is more, finds their strength to be more on creating demand and doing networking events and calling on people and creating quotes and doing all of that sort of work. There is a new strong movement right now. I don't know if you've heard of the fractional leadership. I'm working with several different people who are engaged in doing kind of as a fractional COO or a fractional CFO, those sorts of roles. In small business, you're typically going to hold on to the CEO title and bring somebody in. And really, they offer their expertise and experience on a part-time basis at a fractional of the cost. That's the whole idea there, is you get all of their experience, but only have to pay for part of them. And it's a great intermediate, to bridge that gap between the need for it and having a full-time person fulfilling that role. I've seen businesses carry that in very long and far into their growth. So this can be a perfect solution for that transition period, and it aligns well with the financial needs of the company. So most of the time, the business owner is the visionary and oversees strategy. The problem is that it's not urgent often, and often gets neglected as they engage in the responsibilities of the now and next. They're never getting to the later. And so that's where we talk about businesses not having clear vision strategy. They're just not spending time with it. It's not until you can successfully reassign that frontline work and management responsibilities that you can have, you can have and be strategic as your primary responsibility. There is no one answer to this evolution and how you will evolve and reassign responsibilities, but it needs to come from a mindfulness of your strengths, along with a clarity in the vision of the future that you desire for it. All right, we're going to jump into real quick here. What are those 6 practices that I referred to? So we start with the task inventory. As I mentioned before, this is at the core of, I believe, the managerial leadership practices. I showed how the task inventory really connects people and your purpose. It's important that you get that part right, because again, all of the other practices are based on it. The task inventory allows us to break down the complexities of the business to manageable parts. A task's output aggregates or assembles, we call, into functions, and then functions then aggregate or assemble into departments. A task, another way to define a task is, for me, and I've heard this before, a task is the smallest unit of work that we would typically measure. So that comes into play as we're trying to monitor performance and create our metrics. Another definition is a task is just simply an assignment of work. It's what we would look at as a breakdown of how we assign work to people. So the task inventory really addresses the why. It gives context to the work into the function. It also answers the what. We talked about that before, about paint done. So for each task that we create, we give it context. Why are we doing this? It better not be just because this is the way we've always been doing it. We really want to make sure that we understand, why it's done in the context of the function in the department. What is that, we start bringing in KPIs, we describe it, but we also create benchmarks for it. Often we'll have policies for our tasks, and these create parameters for why, or parameters for the execution of that task. It also helps us then to start to create a catalog of knowledge and skill that we need within our departments in order for them to be successful. So the rest of the these practices, the next one is really how we hold people accountable. And this is around the lines of role assignments or role descriptions or job descriptions, you may have heard them as. So we leverage off the role assignments, leverage off the task inventory to properly assign focus and responsibility to members of our teams. They play a key role in getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. Then we can properly hold them accountable. So roles can be part of an assignment of tasks, and this would be how we look to the task inventory. But then also roles can also be assignments of responsibility from a standpoint of those 3 different layers. Do we have people who are managers, general manager, supervisor does come into there. I didn't talk much about that, but that would be a subset of the frontline teams for it. But we'll see later how we can leverage these role descriptions in not only holding people accountable, but for developing their competency and expertise. So the next practice is documenting our processes. So there's a lot to be said here, but basically, I started this business off as doing process documentation for people. I felt it was the most important thing for a manager to do for their departments, or a business to do for the success of their teams. But I've changed my tune on that. I say don't document your processes, at least not yet. First, do your task inventory to determine what processes are not delivering expectations, and then focus on those. Then dissect and document those processes with the objective of improving and properly training your team members on them. So, process documentation leverages the task inventory and really becomes your knowledge asset. It's really your documentation library. So it's really a cool way of, doing the task inventory and then creating the steps and instructions for it. Documentation is required for a culture of clarity, but very few people I know enjoy doing it. I do. Again, it's like broccoli. They don't want to do it, but they know it's good for them. We found that documentation will not get done if you ask the person doing the work to document it. If you have a manager, it's their responsibility, but they can bring in help. We also have used like the buddy system where there's people on a team doing it for them. We do recordings and Zoom as they show us how to do it. And then we address it that way. So some statistics around documentation. I'll whip through these quickly. Teams or companies that document, or their people are 70% more engaged. That work being done is done with 50% more efficiency, with 50% reduction in errors. These next two I think are the most significant. 60% faster time to productivity. So as you're growing and you need to get people up to speed, if you have your processes document, those processes that you're assigning to them, they will become 60% faster time to productivity, ultimately leading to a 30% more likelihood to reach growth goals. Monitoring performance. We want to monitor the performance of our team members with data as much as possible to quantify things versus just guessing. Observation is helpful, but I think when we can see and really quantify the output of their work is much more helpful. I think even towards the, getting into the discussions of are they coming up short, that we can actually have concrete evidence of that. We look to the task inventory to determine what we should measure. We follow the structure of leading and lagging. I'm also a big fan and believer in capacity planning so that we don't oversell and we run into problems with stressing our teams and dissatisfying our clients. So we want to use data to see where are we at with our capacity. And then we also use it within constraint analysis. We're going to talk a minute about strategic planning, where we can, look to data to see where do we need to prioritize improvement within our business. People leverage is created through high performance. As I presented earlier, the way we align the performance of the people is through the task inventory. First we want to educate them, as I mentioned earlier. Educating is providing insights into the underlying concepts and methodology of the work. Once they're educated, we have them do the work and understand it. We leverage the task inventory for role assignments and processes and present that to them with steps and instructions. Coaching is more of that real-time observing of performance and then providing immediate support and feedback for them. And then the final aspect of developing expertise within them is really around mentoring. Mentoring to me is that proactive career support, giving that person the big picture and how their career can evolve within our organization. Back to what I said before, taking them on a journey, see where they're at when they come in, and then develop them through to be the best employee within your organization. And then the final of the 6 practices is really is continuous improvement. Sorry, my computer's a little slow here. Continuous improvement also leverages the task inventory, but also the performance monitoring, our data, our process documentation to see where things might be not performing properly. And this is how we start creating efficiencies and save time and effort. I love the word Kaizen, that's coming out of the Toyota way, where it's never done. I love dealing with managers who believe there's always a better way to improve, no matter where they're at with it. So first we need to determine future requirements. We want to understand, again, our constraints. That's where we're going to use the data aspect or performance monitoring to understand where are we coming up short in our benchmarks. And then we create a roadmap that prioritizes what we need to elevate in order to reach our growth goals. Strategic planning is really an initiative that's an extension of improving process. We recommend it from an annual standpoint, that a business takes a step back. We do some constraint analysis for each department. We do something called a vision building session with the business owner to understand where they would like to see the business going forward. We affirm that vision and then create a roadmap on an annual basis that's quarter by quarter with it. So that is the 6 practices, the 6 practices of managerial leadership. I am going to skip over. So at this point in your business, if you're a small startup, you may not feel that you're ready to title someone in your organization as a manager. With that said, I believe it's never too early for you to lay the foundation and create your managerial leadership practice platform. And investing in the managerial leadership platform sets the stage for smooth scaling as you do bring people into your teams. I say from startup to 1 million, you'll be assigning roles. You'll personally be assigned roles across, up and down, and throughout the organization. You'll start the business with all the responsibilities. There's the book, The E-Myth. That was the first place where I started looking at, lay it all out, lay your entire organization out. You'll be put in and overseeing every aspect of it, but at least you see it there. Then you'll start, and I call this really the player coach, where you're both doing all of the work and you're starting to manage some people is kind of your first step. The next evolution of that is going to be where eventually you're bringing in managers and you're being more of just the manager, and you're removing yourself from the frontline teams for it. Eventually, as you grow, you'll become more of just the manager of the managers, where you're not doing frontline work. You're not even doing management work. You're being strategic and you're managing the managers. Another consideration for this is something called the business analyst. Successful managerial leadership implementations and management needs a champion. And when we found the business owner is the champion, it typically doesn't keep going. We'll implement it and it typically fades as they get busy with other things. So we recommend, if you're going to implement these processes, that you bring in or you hire a champion. I've seen it done both ways, but the business analyst is, again, sort of like that fractional, where you only have to hire part of their time. The business analyst is a role to be considered for small and growing businesses. They can help with project management, data analytics, process development. They can be outsourced and typically they don't have any decision-making power. That's really their difference. They're just providing support to leadership and management for that. And they're great utility players to fill in the gaps of managerial leadership. We think of them in the role of corporations or larger organizations of business analysts, and it's really part of my mission to bring that sort of role into small business as a way of actually providing resources that really are budget friendly for it. So I'm just wrapping up. Again, I appreciate everybody's time and attention. I'm gonna leave you with 3 thoughts. The first one is structure is your friend. Structure brings order to chaos, and I love the idea of it providing freedom within a framework, especially as you're assigning responsibilities. As a manager of managers, you're providing expectations and you're really laying out the requirements. You let that manager then use their subject matter expertise to determine the how and to be creative in process in meeting those expectations. The second thought I have is Documenting your process is not your priority. When you're thinking of managerial leadership and providing value to your teams, complete your task inventory first. Make sure you've accounted for all of the work. We call it. I've also heard it termed as our work catalog, so that we really know all of the work that's required, and in all of its expectations. You can then leverage it later for the other practices like documentation and role descriptions and those sorts of things. And my final thought is, I love the idea that the best time to plant a tree was probably 20 years ago. The next best time is today. If you have teams that aren't meeting your expectations, these are practices you should consider sooner than later. If you don't have a team yet, but plan to, get familiar with these practices, to provide the best work experience possible for those that choose to join you on your journey. Again, I thank you for choosing to attend this discussion on aligning people and purpose. I know your time and attention is valuable. I love to connect on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there to provide any feedback, comments, or questions for it.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. We appreciate your time today as well. And if anybody does have any questions here, we have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions they'd like to put in the chat. Otherwise, just a couple of quick housekeeping items as we wrap up here. Just so everyone knows, you will get a email with a link to the replay of this session. It will also include Kelly's slides. So be on the lookout for that. You'll receive that in the next day or two. You'll also get an email from SCORE with a link to a survey. It's a short survey. We don't ask you a lot of questions, but we do really appreciate the feedback because it helps us to, to know that the content that we're providing is hitting the mark, so to speak. And you've also got the option always to let us know if there's something you'd like to see on our workshop schedule. We're always, trying to add new and helpful content. So if there's something that is of interest to you, please let us know. And again, just a reminder that if you'd like to sign up to work with a mentor, or for that matter, if you'd like to become a mentor yourself and share your expertise with other small business owners, you can do any of that at our website at score.org/TwinCities. So Kelly, I don't see any new questions in the chat other than somebody asked if they would be able to get a copy of the task inventory that you were making reference to. So I'm not sure if there's any detail on that beyond what would be in the slide deck that everybody will receive, but that's the only other thing I see in the
Yeah, I can reach out and provide something to that effect for her.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, thank you again, Kelly, for your time today. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you all on a another SCORE webinar or workshop sometime soon. And hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.